done my duty.
Good job.
Hey, TV system. We got that thinning camera now, it's awesome.
The thing, you know. Got the one that adds here?
Hit the right switch?
Call up to him? Oh, there's Mark.
Hey, okay. Welcome to the Board of Selectmen meeting for Monday, February 4th, 2013. Start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Scott?
Yes, sir. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, so tonight's agenda is a short agenda. We're going to have the continuance of the public hearing for the host community agreement for 15 Great Road LLC at 7 o'clock. And then at 8 o'clock, we've got some other business. Got a tax title abutter lot sales program, approved sale of lot to abutter. And then we've got the PMBC LCTV accept donation of chairlift. Okay, so let's get started with the continuance of the public hearing for 15 Great Road. So we have a presentation tonight, I
Well, I
believe?
think that what we may want to do is just follow council first to address some of the issues that have been raised. A lot of information was put on the record at the first session of this public hearing, and the purpose of tonight is to take additional testimony that, as well, that there were some questions that were raised in the first evening, some questions that the board asked to have answered, and maybe Tom can just walk us through those. That might be a good way to start.
Okay. Makes sense to me.
Right, why don't we begin with the board's question, or with the question presented to the board: does the board have the authority to sign a host community agreement? And we provided you with a letter dated February 1st in response to that question. And our answer to that question is yes, you do have the authority to enter into a host community agreement. And I think the best way to look at it is there could certainly, host community agreements take all sorts of shapes and deal with all sorts of issues. So the best way to answer the question is to look specifically at what the board is being asked to do in the host community agreement. Look at those issues one by one and determine one by one if you have the authority to do it. So that's what we did, and I'm happy to walk you through that. The first issue would be setting aside the tax title judgments on the easement lots. So essentially, you're in the middle of a taking, and the host community agreement requires that you enter into an agreement with the developer that they be allowed, that we jointly go into court to allow them to set aside the judgment, to pay off the taxes so that they can retain ownership of the lots. This is authority that you have in general and that you can exercise on any tax title judgment. And it's not often that when you get kind of far down the stream in a tax title case that someone comes to you and says, wait a second, I want to pay all my money and end this tax title judgment. So it doesn't happen often, but you certainly can do it, and the key here being that all the back taxes have to be paid in order to complete this process. So what this does is it sets it aside. It allows the various issues discussed in the host community agreement to go forward. If they get what they're looking for out of town meeting, they pay off the taxes. If they don't, we put things back just the way they were, and we take those properties in tax title. So that would be issue one. The second is that you're seeking authority from town meeting to convey sewer easements. So this is nothing more than you putting an article on the warrant. You're not guaranteeing a result, you're not guaranteeing anything, you're only saying we'll put forward a warrant article that puts before town meeting the option of selling easements to the developer so that he can reach those certain lots on Surrey Road with piping for the wastewater treatment facility. If he can't, or if town meeting says no, then the issue goes away. He's not going to challenge it any further. And that's it. So again, you're not offering to sell him anything. If this were some sort of a conveyance in land, it would be beyond your authority, but it's merely putting a warrant article on the, or an article on the warrant. Okay, the third issue is issuing written confirmation regarding the wastewater treatment facility. So as I think you're aware, my office issued a letter back in September discussing kind of the zoning ramifications of the wastewater treatment facility. And we said that we see it as an accessory use, and that generally accessory uses need to be on the same lot as the primary use. And that in this instance, the primary use for those lots outside of the 40B are not, but that the zoning board can, essentially the decision becomes theirs. They can restrict in the comprehensive permit the use of the wastewater treatment facility to the 40B, or they can grant the waiver requested by the developer to allow the wastewater treatment facility to be used outside of the 40B. So this writing, a couple of things need to happen. First, the ZBA needs to issue their comprehensive permit, and they need to grant the waiver requested that the developer be allowed to, or that the wastewater treatment facility not be restricted to the 40B. If that's done, we've already said that they are then entitled to use that wastewater, connect those lots outside of the 40B to the wastewater treatment facility. So this is a position that's been on the record since September. So if the ZBA does, as I've just explained, all we'd be doing essentially is supporting that with another letter. And Roland would be supporting it as well. I think he's of the same opinion that we are, that if the ZBA acts as I've described, it's legal. So this is not a new position, this is just a position that we've held since September, and it just means that the ZBA acted in a certain way. Okay, the next provision, and I think the final provision, is supporting the developer in litigation. And I know there's some concern about this, so let me explain exactly what needs to happen here. So two things need to happen. First, the agreement says that we will actively support the developer in litigation, but that only applies to a limited category of litigation, and that means, one, someone needs to have filed suit against some official of the town or a town board, and two, it means that the purpose of that suit is to challenge the developer's right to connect the lots in and out of the 40B to the wastewater treatment facility. Now remember, we've already said if the ZBA grants the waiver, then we believe they have the right to connect those lots outside of the 40B to the wastewater treatment facility. So if someone sues a member, an official of the town or a town board, and the purpose of that suit is to challenge the connection to those wastewater treatment facilities, we have agreed to go to court and say, we believe they have the right to connect to the wastewater treatment facility. So again, this is the position that my office has held since September, and it's nothing new. It's just we're following in line with what we've already agreed. So I think those are the four issues that were in question in the host community agreement, and I'm happy to take any questions on that, but I think that's where we are.
Yeah, I got a few points. So, that being said, Tom,
Yeah.
Nothing in this agreement authorizes anything to do with the wastewater treatment.
Nope.
It doesn't authorize any lease, the easement. It doesn't authorize anything to do with the tax taking. It doesn't authorize the use of the wastewater facility for the 40A. purely a document to say, we support those boards' decisions. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's essentially, the other boards are making the decision. What the host community agreement does is set up a way to receive funds
Mm-hmm.
that have been offered by the developer for something that other boards are doing.
Okay. So again, no authorization, it's a matter of the town saying, we not only are we supporting what the planning board, what the ZBA is doing, and what the town meeting will or will not do.
Right, so the ZBA needs to take certain actions.
Correct.
Under this. Town meeting needs to take certain actions under this. And if they do, then money comes to the town. If they don't, money doesn't come to the town, but this board is not making any kind of specific decision one way or the other on
I had a number of things when I read the whole thing that I submitted questions to, but I wanted to go specifically ask you some things about some things you just said. So we're vacating the tax title. Okay, is this a routine and customary procedure that would be done with anybody?
it would be your decision. If anyone came to you and said, you know, you're pretty far downstream on the tax title, and we want to reverse it, but in order to reverse it, we agree we're gonna have to pay you all the back taxes, you have the choice of doing it or not doing it.
What is the procedure for a taxpayer who has fallen afoul and we're in the process of taking their property? How do they take control back?
Okay.
Is it, what I'm getting at, is this the same procedure or is this something unique?
This procedure is set out in the statute, so that, and here's where we are in that process. So you undergo a tax taking, and it goes to land court, and the land court makes a decision that says, okay, you've done everything you were supposed to do. They had till, you know, X date to make the payment. They didn't make the payment. You now own the property, and that's where you are. You now are in control of the property. Correct me if I'm wrong on this. There's then a process where you can petition the court. The taxpayer can come forward and say, I understand that you've completed the taking, but I have a year to come forward and say, I would like to reopen this and pay my taxes. And it's your decision to make. You don't have to. You can say, we're not going to do it. The tax taking stands. But the taxpayer does have a year, and I think they need the town to work with them. I think it's either they need a really good reason why they didn't complete or they didn't come back and pay the taxes, or they need the town to join them in the motion to have the tax taking reopened to allow them to pay off and retain ownership.
So the Board of Selectmen makes this decision.
I believe they do.
And have we, so am I hearing that it is the same process that we would use if it was, you know, Joe's
If it's
auto body?
any other taxpayer, in fact, and sometime in the last 2 or 3 years, and I can search specifically, but I recall where we had a property that was in tax title, the town already owned it, and we were already in court and had passed a certain date, and the treasurer brought us the property owner who expressed an interest in redeeming it and paying it. So we had to, I think, technically undo the suit in order to allow that to happen. That's sort of what we're doing now. The intervening factor on the timing is, if there were a town meeting next week, then I don't think we'd need the extension in the court suit.
Right.
That the 2 years runs out between now and town meeting. That if you could get the town meeting inside of that 2-year period, you wouldn't have to do anything. You wait and see what town meeting does. Either they approve the easement, in which case the back taxes get paid, or they don't, in which case we take no action and continue to hold the property in tax
So in
title.
falling out of that 2-year period, are we then legally capable of taking this action?
Yes, it's,
Okay.
as Keith referred to, it's called the right of redemption.
I hate to sound like Perry Mason, but yes or no, that works. Talked about waiver versus variance. You've used two different things. When somebody goes to the ZBA and they have to get a variance, they have certain criteria they have to meet.
Right.
Now, in meeting those criteria usually has to do with hardship, and I don't know what they all are, but hardship is the number one thing. So, in this case, you're talking about a waiver.
Right.
What's the difference?
You're in
On do criteria, do the same criteria apply?
They don't. You're in a 40B process, so the town zoning bylaws are, they all have to be viewed through the prism of 40B. So because we're under our 10%, we know that we need to have a reason to deny the requested waivers. And in this instance, so the board can consider it, but the factors you're looking for, I think, are the shape, topography, or soil conditions. You need to have some sort of unique shape, topography, or soil conditions in order to grant a variance. Those aren't the standards in this instance. Basically, it's...
Because of the 40B?
Right.
But we're crossing a line that says 40B on this side and 40A on the other. If
Yes,
it
I
was
understand.
done in the 40A, would it not be required to have a variance just like anybody else? With the same conditions?
If the 40A, so essentially it's the 40B that changes based on the opinion we issued in
So
September.
the 40B supersedes the 40A?
The accessory use is on the 40B. So it's part of the application before the ZBA.
Isn't a septic system for a person who owns a house in the 40A and the septic system is actually in the 40B, isn't the septic system in the 40B the accessory use?
Well, there's a couple of intervening factors. So for instance, we know that a septic system, under Title V, a septic system needs to be on the same lot as the primary residence. But that's Title V. That's not zoning.
Not correct either. You have shared septic systems under Title V and under Little.
Yeah, I think we're talking about individual septic systems. So, yeah, you can have shared septic systems too, and you can have wastewater treatment facilities, obviously, as well. But in this instance, because the accessory use is a structure on the 40B, it's part of the 40B application, and it's a waiver that the ZBA can issue.
But the connection I'm trying to make is the other way.
Right,
The person, Jim, whoever his name, owns a house in the 40B development, and his septic system is in the 40B development. That then becomes an accessory use, doesn't it?
Say that again?
Not 40A, 40B.
40A, they buy a house, they have a house, and their septic system is actually on the 40B property.
You have a house in the 40A, and the septic system is on the 40B. And the
The
septic
septic system becomes an
is
accessory use to that house, doesn't it?
It is.
So therefore, it would fall under a variance rather than a waiver.
I disagree. I think it's part of the 40B process. David, let me just have the discussion, if you would.
Well, the chair will recognize you, I'm sorry, David. Yeah.
Okay, well, all right, I don't know the answer to that, obviously, I'm down, have some worry about that. Let's talk a little bit about the suit. If someone, you said that if the town is named in a suit, to stop, something to do with we're limited to just the crossing of the road, correct?
Trying to know that the lawsuit that we're referring to needs to be a lawsuit that is trying to prevent the applicant from connecting lots to the wastewater treatment facility. So it's not any suit, it's a specific suit.
Specific to anything that makes the connection from point A to the system.
Correct.
Okay. But they named the town in the suit. That's when we have to defend anyway, correct?
Right.
All right. What if they sue Omni and they don't sue the town? are we obliged to defend Omni in any way, shape, or form, even if they're talking about, you know, you can't connect across this street?
The way the host community agreement is written, we need to be named in the suit in order to defend. So the answer is no, we wouldn't have to.
So as a follow-up, what if Omni then sues the town as part of this? So then now we're part of the lawsuit, what happens then?
I don't, by the terms of the agreement, I don't think Omni can sue the town and we have to defend Omni. It's someone else suing the town and
So
presumably
it has to be somebody else suing the town.
Suing the town.
I do not, I will tell you that the specific language does not address if Omni sues the town, do we have to defend Omni? But that's not logical.
It's not logical, but we're not talking about logical things here. Just want to make sure we got that covered.
Wasn't necessary.
All right, well, that answers my questions with respect to what you just presented. I mean, you've seen the other stuff that I've sent, and I apologize for the tardiness of getting it done, but, you know, making a living has to come first. But, so I would stop there, and we can come back to this, to what the questions I asked, maybe later after the rest of the board goes through his presentation.
Sorry, can you clarify what you're
Yeah, 'cause I had no idea what you're talking
I don't know
about.
what you're talking about either.
Today, I submitted, after I read the thing, I submitted my questions and comments to both the letter and the host community agreement. And I simply it identifies a section and says what, you know, asks a question or makes a comment about it.
So the letter that he just read, are those questions too, and the host community agreement, is that what it
Yes,
is?
they're specific, these are specifically related to the documents that were supplied to us, which is the letter.
Okay.
And the
You
opinion
sent those
letter-
out, Keith, to everybody, copied the board.
Yeah.
It was what, 2:30, 3:30, something like that?
Yeah, 11.
I didn't see it this morning.
Oh, 11, is that right? I didn't get that later.
Oh, sorry, that was another one. Let's see when this one.
But I guess what I'm saying,
12:20.
what I'm saying, Mr. Chair, is relative to what he just presented, you know, I don't wanna go into this yet until everybody else has, you know, had an opportunity to go back and forth on this particular presentation.
Mr. Doucette?
So I'm,
See you on the copy. I
you
got.
weren't here for the last meeting, but at that meeting, I reported a meeting that Greg and I had with Mr. Hale, and in that he said he made the point that in perpetuity was something that would make them not, if that were included in the host community agreement, they wouldn't sign it. So if that's taken out, what is the advantage of the host community agreement on the town side?
So I can report to you a couple of things. Without the in perpetuity, or without some protection that, you know, we're gonna maintain our position above the 10%, it's really, you know, there's financials involved, but you have no other security.
But you have the ZBA, you have ZBA conditions that could have in perpetuity on it, right? They are planning on issuing that. Does the ZBA do the ZBA conditions also contain the financial, the payments based on the house
No.
lots?
No, the reason we broke it into two agreements was for the simple reason that whatever goes into the comprehensive permit issued by the ZBA is subject to challenge to the Housing Appeals Committee. So, you know, so in the first instance, the developer would go back to the ZBA and say, I want to amend this decision to
Right.
delete this, delete that, whatever.
Yeah.
If they don't get what they want from the ZBA, it goes to the Housing Appeals Committee. We're not confident that we can get the Housing Appeals Committee to support those kind of conditions. So we wanted them out of the comprehensive permit so that it's not that, one, we have a different way to enforce it, and two, we're not subject to the whim of the HAC.
Yeah. And the case law says so, because the Amesbury decision, I learned this from Ed Marchand at a 40B training, that if there are provisions in a ZBA decision that are beyond what the narrow scope of what a ZBA gets to consider in 40B, the Housing Appeals Committee can toss those provisions out if they reach that appeal level. That's why we've been that's why we came up with this approach of a host community agreement in the first place, where if there are business terms that are not sustainable, if there was an appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee, then let's put those in a separate document that stands by itself. And that's where we wanted the financial provisions. We were also hoping to get some language in here. We were asked at some of the previous meetings on the language, for example, about rental in perpetuity. Where does that appear? And where it would appear, it's in the decision that the Zoning Board of Appeals will issue under 40B. And just to say what that is, that decision is appealable to the Housing Appeals Court now, and we recognize, because we've said it before and it's been said, that if in the future there was, because market conditions changed or something, if either the current developer or successor wanted to convert from rentals, even though it says rental in perpetuity, that they could put an application in to a future ZBA. Future ZBA would have to entertain it. They don't have to approve it. They could say no, but that decision of the ZBA would then be appealable to the Housing Appeals Court, where the outcome is uncertain.
At best.
What that said to us, though, and was that if we are going to have a separate agreement that the Board of Selectmen enters into, wouldn't that be the best place to put in additional language, sort of belt and suspenders, that addresses this most important issue of rental in perpetuity, or at a minimum, ensuring that there are enough rental units that result from this proposal in order to keep us above 10%. That's the ball we're trying to keep our eye on.
Okay.
And there's actually a development on that, which either Tom can say, or David, or whatever, but we've got some movement on that
Okay.
issue that we can report tonight.
Just to go back to what Keith said about the maintaining the 10%, is that a condition in the ZBA agreement? So if a certain amount, if they want to change these from rentals in the future, that they have to maintain the 10%?
No.
Maybe, can I take a shot at that?
Sure.
Well,
Yeah.
The
The ZBA
ZBA
is-
okay,
agreement.
all right, okay.
The draft decision currently has a condition that says all units shall remain rental units in perpetuity. That's been agreed upon
Period.
by the applicant. However, at any point, an applicant can request a modification to a comprehensive permit. The ZBA has to respond within 20 days as to whether or not that change is a substantial or insubstantial change. The guidelines state that a change in housing tenure from rental to ownership is a substantial change. Therefore, there has to be a public hearing. The ZBA holds the public hearing and then makes its decision. That decision can be appealed to the HAC, the Housing Appeals Committee. And as your town council said, the outcome of that is uncertain, but it's fair to say that in most cases, the HAC has been sympathetic to the applicant. So there is no assurance, despite that language, that these units will remain rental units in perpetuity. Therefore, the town has said, what kind of agreement, is there a possibility of reaching an agreement that will give the town some protection in terms of maintaining 10% of its units as qualified affordable units, so that the leverage on 40Bs goes to the town? You can deny any 40B if you're at that 10%, and the applicant has no appeal. You could also approve a 40B that you felt made a positive contribution to the town.
You meaning the ZBA?
The
The
ZBA.
ZBA.
This is a ZBA decision.
In their decision, so under the hypothetical that if somebody comes back to change, has a substantial change, and the ZBA makes a decision on that, can they condition that, come to an agreement and condition that at that point? So if the
They
developer.
could condition it, and then it could be appealed.
Right, but they could say, they could say at the public hearing, they could ask the applicant, will you agree to keep us above the 10%? If the applicant says yes, then they can make the condition at that point, and then likely not be appealed.
Yes, and I assume they would.
Yeah, okay.
You could do that, but what you could also do is get language now in an agreement that is not part of,
Right.
the appeal process, which preserves, which identifies that eventuality, that possibility, and puts language in another agreement, and specifically in this host community agreement, which maps out what would happen
Right.
if that situation.
But until now, we've been under the impression that that hasn't been possible, and that Mr. Hill, if I'm speaking for you or speaking out of turn, you have said before that you wouldn't sign a host community agreement that has in perpetuity in it. And,
I did say that.
and if,
Right.
Mr. Chair, if there's been some sort of development
He's
that.
still, yeah, he's still, yeah, we'll let him speak
I know,
for
Mr.
himself.
Chairman.
He's still saying that, but we've got a way to address his concern about not wanting in perpetuity in another agreement, and our concern, well, we want assurance that we stay above 10%. And there's,
The best of
So-
both worlds.
yeah.
So my line of I think I'm pretty clear on my questioning, and that was to clarify that we do have the in perpetuity protection somewhere else. If we don't have that in our host community agreement, there is still a reason to have it, to lock in the payments and possibly anything else that could negotiate, such as keep us above the 10% should it, the in perpetuity change. So that's basically what I wanted to clear up, so thank you both.
You should not take any comfort in having that condition in the comprehensive permit decision.
I understand, Mr. Marchand, but if they're not gonna sign it, they've already told us they're not gonna sign an in perpetuity, then we don't have an HCA, and that's the only protection we have,
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
okay? So I don't want anyone to imply that I'm comfortable with having only one approving board. Yeah, it probably would be nice to have an HCA, but if they're not gonna sign it, that's a moot point.
Can I ask you a question related to that? Is it really enforceable? If it's in there and they say, well, we're gonna go to ZBA, we're gonna get a change, and you know what, we don't really care so much about the 10%. Do we have a standing chance of enforcing at that point, based on the host community agreement?
Absolutely. The host community agreement is a contract between two willing parties.
It's a recorded deed, right? It gets recorded.
We can record it, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're planning on
Right.
recording this, yeah, so it's,
So-
that's absolutely
Yeah,
enforceable.
so
And there's
ju-
no appeal.
Yeah, so just to be clear on this, and my apologies, the information is only about 90 minutes old. Now, at this point, I got a call at 6 o'clock tonight, called the chair, come down and make copies of the language that you have here. But let me say, all of us, and I know it includes the chair and the vice chair and various other members that our negotiating team, all of us have been making the point for quite a while that getting above 10% and staying above 10% is a very important goal for the town of Littleton to achieve in these negotiations. And to the point where if at the end of the day, we had a host community agreement which either didn't give us rental in perpetuity in a separate enforceable agreement, or the insurance that we stay above 10%, should there be a conversion of some of the units here from rental, where they all count, to ownership, where only the affordable count in the inventory, that what we did was actually reach back to some of the earliest negotiations that we had done with Omni. And one of the ideas that we had floated was the idea of having language somewhere which first recognized that it's a rental project and they're all rental units, and that's our goal, we want to keep them there. But if circumstances led to some of those units becoming owner occupied, that we didn't want the result of that to be to bring the town of Littleton below 10%. So there, the premium in the discussions was, can we come up with language It keeps us above 10%, because if we can, that's the best possible reason for this Board of Selectmen to enter into a host community agreement, because you can't get that unless you enter into a host community agreement. So if you have an HCA that doesn't give you that, you don't have everything you need. So we stress that point, and we received a proposal from the developer in this evening, which you have a copy of, which uses our numbers, the numbers that we had generated, and proposes to keep us above 10%, and perhaps David would want to walk us through that.
So let's, before we go there, let's finish up with our questions in regards to Mr. Harrigan's, go from there.
Some of the things I wanted to go through have already been talked about. I know that I did have the pleasure of talking to our chair this morning, because I was away for the whole day and just get back. And at that time, my major concern was the in perpetuity, and if that wasn't in the home community agreement, then I would have problems tonight. And I'm happy to see what's in front of me. Other people haven't seen it, but I think that's one of my most major concerns is the people who I have talked to in town basically say, we really don't want this project. We know it's coming. The 10% is so important because of what the effect it could have on our school systems and the finances of the town. We need something in there that'll help us for the next, in perpetuity or for a good number of years. So that was my major concern. The other thing, before I turn it over, I just want to state too that I just want to say thank you to all the people who've done a lot of hard work for the ZBA for a year and a half. They've gone through this, and I know some of the meetings at the very beginning, the rooms was in the community room next door was packed. And we've come to this point now, and I congratulate everyone who's put the time and effort in to reach this point. If we could say we don't want it and it would happen, then that would be different. But I think our thing is that as selectmen, we have to take the best thing that's out there that protects the town, and I think that's what our object is right here. This agreement is based on actions of other boards, and we're just hopefully signing on to this, and this in perpetuity thing is extremely important in my mind, that either it's in perpetuity or the language, some type of language that would be in that, that separate agreement.
Right. I echo exactly what you said. Getting us out of the 40B business is a good thing. So I don't have any other points. I mean, you folks have done a nice job in bringing up your questions and points and kind of repeat what I was thinking. So thank you for that explanation. Appreciate it. Go ahead.
At this
Oh, do you
point,
want to go
some-
through that? Sure. Why don't we go through that, and then I'll turn it over to you.
Some of the stuff has been answered, but I know you guys saw this, and it gets a little difficult because it refers to a specific section of your letter and so forth. So let's see if I can sort of cut to the chase on this. I would appreciate that, you look at these, some of the stuff has been answered, some of it hasn't. I'll go to, the warrant article that the selectmen would sponsor to go to town meeting. What I want to make sure we stay clear of is that we aren't trying to tell town meeting how to vote. That whatever language is in the host community agreement does not say that does not imply, or in any way, shape, or form, that we're doing anything more than place an article on the town meeting floor. And that if the board so votes to approve it, that's fine, but not obliged to do so. What we're obliged to do is put an article on town meeting floor. And when I read that, I wasn't sure it was saying just that. It sort of felt a little bit like to me, like we were saying, we'll put an article on and support it. And I think where we ought to be is, yes, we'll put an article on. End of discussion.
I mean, normal business practice for this board is, just because we put something on as a warrant article, we take a vote to support it or not support it at a later date. I mean, that's been our procedure.
Yeah, I don't know why it's, sorry, Tom, that's something for us to talk about
Yeah,
later.
but, I mean, certainly, take your opinion on that.
Sure, well, and I'm gonna turn it over to my partner Chris Heap, because there's, a lot of balls in the air today with this project. And so Chris had time to focus on Alex's question, so I'll turn it over to Chris to answer these specifically.
We
Thanks.
all want to have a Chris nearby to answer questions.
Chris, you want to sit up here?
That must be
I
great.
think it's called passing the buck.
As soon as whatever I get from Alex, can I pass them to Chris too?
The specific language of the host community agreement says that the town shall seek, at its 2013 annual town meeting, a vote authorizing you to convey the easement. It does not specifically impose any other more affirmative obligation on the board. I think that if you put the article on the town meeting warrant, I think you have satisfied your obligation under the host community agreement.
So we wouldn't be put in a position where we were, my concern is, would we be put in a position where we're utilizing town resources to say, this is how we'd like you to vote?
That's
And
not
I
up to
think
Chris,
that's
that's
what we
up
have
to
to say in this.
But that's not up to Chris, that's up to
No,
us.
I understand.
Yeah,
Then we can,
that's-
okay, because you keep asking, yeah.
I think that's our vote when we look through, look at all the warrant articles and we take our position on
All
them.
right. All right, I'll keep moving. Page 3, item 3, I'm not sure I understood exactly what that meant, of your letter. Okay, page 3, item number 3.
This is our February 1st letter.
Issuing written confirmation.
Yes.
Can you explain it?
Sure. As part of the host community agreement, this board and the building commissioner would each need to provide written confirmation that all of the specifically called out lots outside of the 40B can connect to the wastewater treatment facility. That is something that the applicant has asked for and is currently in the agreement. That is not of any particular benefit to the town or this board, but that is something that they have asked for throughout the negotiations. And all that the board is required to do is provide written confirmation of that to the applicant. And as Tom said, that is the position itself is consistent with what we've said all along, which is if the comprehensive permit issues with that waiver in it, they can connect. And that's what we're being called upon to confirm. In the
Supporting the ZBA decision.
And town council's opinion, yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Alex,
so
can I
as
ask a
a-
question?
I'd like to follow up on that. So if the ZBA does not allow that, does that make this null and void?
Makes the host community agreement gone. The host community agreement is dependent on the decision which is attached, which reflects the waiver from the ZBA. So we have no.
I'm sorry, can you identify yourself for the record?
Lou Levine, attorney for Omni. So attached as an exhibit to the host community agreement is a draft ZBA decision, which contains the waiver that you've been talking about. So if, that's a condition to going forward on the host community agreement.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that we're allowing the connection. It means if the ZBA doesn't allow the connection, this thing's null and void, doesn't it?
Correct.
Alex, can I jump in for, you want to change that? Can I jump in?
You got a follow-up to the same question?
Well, but he's got the floor. Can I jump in for a question, or do you want to keep going?
With respect to the same
With respect
question?
to-
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
So does this put any restrictions on any other boards or commissions other than the building commissioner? Does this tell the planning board or the zoning board anything that they have to do?
Absolutely not. It assumes the ZBA has already made its own decision on, and a decision that includes the waiver on the
And it
treatment.
says nothing for the planning board or anybody else? Any other board? Okay, thank you.
In your letter, you talk about there's no legal need to go before the town meeting to satisfy this obligation of the host community agreement. Are there occurrences, I'll skip down to the third comment, because the other stuff you pretty much answered. Are there occurrences where a town meeting has approved a host community agreement? And you've already said that selectmen in other towns have done a host community agreement. But has there been an exception where a host community agreement was done by ratification of the town.
I don't know specifically, but it wouldn't surprise me to learn that that's true. That could be for a couple of reasons. One, because the selectmen thought it was important to go to town meeting to have them ratify the agreement, so that could be a political decision, not a legal decision. Or two, there could be issues or promises in the host community agreement that are beyond the authority of the selectmen. For instance, some sort of a conveyance of land would be beyond the authority of the selectmen and needs to go to town meeting.
But typically, these agreements, and we've seen samples that have been brought to us by MAPC from other communities, that they deal with, say, zoning amendments that the board might bring forward, subject to town meeting approval. It's a way to map everything out, including things that are beyond the scope of your authority, that it's subject to someone else's approval. And in this case, the easements are only granted by town meeting. In other similar agreements, it's been a zoning amendment change. And we talked about that with some of the developers that we were considering for projects like that.
It's not unusual. It's a way to get the money piece out of a permit, because you don't want the money piece in the permit.
I have a follow-up too, if I may. Would that be a non-binding vote, or could we leave that decision up to the town meeting? And, under what scenario would it be that for me, I imagine it would be a non-binding vote recommending the selectmen to sign it, because the selectmen still have to sign the HCA.
Yeah, well, I think you could set it up either way.
Okay, could go either way, okay.
It
That
would be,
requires town meeting, or it's,
you could say, we're not gonna
Advisory.
sign this unless town meeting votes for it.
okay. Thank you.
So, in other matters, we talked about where the selectmen have the authority, the town meeting didn't, not this matter, but in other things that we've come across in our various things that we've done. But in this case, the town meeting could be given authority, or the selectmen would have the authority. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Well, I don't think you could give town meeting the authority, but
They could take it.
you could say, we're not going to exercise our authority unless you tell us to,
Okay.
if that's the way you wanted to do it.
I understand.
But that's really like a non-binding question.
Right,
Like
I
when
think
the-
so.
When the Board of Health
Yeah.
was, what was the issue?
The fluoride, right?
Yeah, and if we didn't bring it to town meeting, we put it on the ballot.
Yeah.
For a non-binding, specifically a non-binding ballot question, which informed the judgment that the Board of Health made subsequently.
Yeah, so it doesn't sound like we could convene our authority, or we could pass our authority on to town meeting. It would just be any other type of agreement that we say. We would still eventually have to sign it. The selectmen would still eventually have to sign the HCA.
They would have to execute.
Right.
Yeah, you have the
Yeah.
authority to do it, and the most the town meeting could do is give a non-binding,
Yeah, that's right.
which is,
Yeah,
we've been engaged in a months-long process of getting non-binding
yeah.
advice from the voters.
So, in your letter, you talked about what we're simply doing is restating some of the facts that were legally bound by others. In other words, ZBA or planning board, whoever it may be. But in fact, there's one big difference here, in that what we're doing that nobody else can do is get the language for the 10%, and attempt to hold that, keep us above the 10%. That nobody, am I correct that nobody else can do that, only we can do that?
That's correct. Yeah, the ZBA, it's subject to challenge.
So,
The only one who has, you are in the best position to enforce that.
because we have it in a separate agreement that's not appealable to the HAC.
See what else?
Are you going into the agreement now, or?
No, I'm in this, yeah, actually I am. The other part that, we talked about, when somebody appeals to the ZBA because of change in marketing conditions or whatever, and that's where we run the risk of losing rental and going to something else. It's mentioned a third-party developer in here many times. So what exactly would be a third-party developer? And to what extent could this be pieced off with different developers And how well are we protected with the host community agreement prevailing in the event that this starts to get in the hands of 2, 3 developers, 3 owners, that sort of thing? How do we prevail in that particular case?
The agreement contemplates that it will get pieced off to more than one developer.
Seems pretty clear that
Beyond
that's what's
and
going
it's,
on.
so it's not only possible, but I think it's the likeliest way that this agreement will play out is that we will be dealing with Omni initially and other developers down the road. The agreement contemplates that with respect to the subdivision lots and the non-easement lots, the town will be paid a percentage of the final sales price, 4.25% for a subdivision lot and 8% for the non-easement lot, when the lot is sold with a finished home on it. So if the one lot or a group of lots is sold from Omni to developer number 1 to developer number 2, no payment is triggered. It is when a developer, either Omni or some other developer down the road, constructs a finished home and sells it to someone who's actually going to move in, that the payment provision is triggered. So the third-party developer is, under the terms of the agreement, really any developer who's not Omni. And in terms of how well protected we are, the agreement is drafted to run with all of the affected land, the 40B, the subdivision, and the easement lots, until such time as we are paid for the individual lots with a finished home on it, at which point the lots will get released on a lot-by-lot basis using subdivision control as a model. Once we're paid, a lot will be released.
And that's why Joe mentioned about getting this recorded, so that now it's right on the registry of deeds, so moving forward, it triggers it right up.
So when you go to get your bank loan to
Right.
build your house or your mortgage to buy the property,
Yeah.
the bank's attorney's gonna say, I see an encumbrance from the town, so I need to be sure that I'm gonna get that off, because I don't want that getting in the way of my mortgage.
Sure.
So,
It's pretty unequivocal.
I think that pretty much, I think we're, I think the question's about what limits do we have to support Omni, or agree with Omni. My only other question was about fair market value, and if there is any scenario that plays out, and it sounds like what you just said, it really can't play out that way, that we actually somehow have these coming in at less than fair market value and us getting, because if we're being paid a certain percentage, us getting something, payment based on something less than fair market value.
The 4.25% and the 8% payments that the town will be owed are based on the final sales price of the home with a finished lot. That's a defined term in the agreement, and it's defined as the price that a good faith purchaser pays in an arm's length transaction, and good faith purchaser is further defined as a person or entity that's completely unrelated to the developer or any of its related entities. So those definitions should operate to make sure that we're getting 4.25% or 8% of the real sales price in an arm's length transaction. There's an alternate way that it'll work in what we think is going to be a somewhat rare situation where someone buys, let's say a consumer buys a vacant lot from the developer and works to put up a home on their own. So not a commercial developer, but somebody wants to just buy a vacant lot and do it themselves. In that scenario, you don't have an arm's length transaction with a finished home on it. You just have someone buy a vacant lot, put up the finished home themselves. So no payments triggered at anywhere along that line until they come in for those people who built their own home come in for an occupancy permit. Then they need to give us either 4.25% or 8%, and they need to produce an appraisal.
Now, that language is in the agreement?
That is in the agreement. So in that situation only, we will be owed an appraisal to establish the fair market value.
Okay.
So you're like talking a construction loan.
Okay. What I'd like to do now is I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Hale, you can walk us through your presentation, and then I will open it up to the public for any new information that will be presented to the board tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're gonna use the PowerPoint, Keith, for this?
You're gonna plug it in.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to cover a couple things tonight. First is the language that you have in mind. And I want some feedback. But secondly, town council has taken a position that we maybe need a waiver, or maybe a waiver is required to connect a lot in the subdivision, or not in the 40B, to the 40B. That's a reasoned position, but there's an equally reasoned position that under Littleton regulations, under state regulations, and under the 40B regulations, that waiver is really not required. And I want to say at the outset that a lot of people put a lot of time and effort into the host community agreement, and our intention is to honor the host community agreement. We've said that our project will have an impact on the town, and that we intend to pay. But I think it puts a lot of pressure on this board and other boards, thinking that town council's position is the only position, or a position that would prevail if this were litigated. It's not the only position, and our position is it likely wouldn't prevail. Having said that, we believe in the host community agreement. We're willing to compromise on the perpetuity issue. We understand that the town has an objective of staying at 10%. And we respect that, and we want to help the town do that, so long as there's some flexibility. And you know, when it comes to the 10% issue, there are a bunch of things that are unforeseen that can happen that that will affect how this plays out in the future. You know, for instance, the leading edge of the baby boom turned 67 this year. So this town and other towns need affordable elderly rental housing. So one affordable elderly rental housing project that would be good for this community would probably also put the town over the 10% and keep the 10% for a long period of time. It was our wish that if something like that happened, that we would be able to go back to the zoning board, which is the proper board to deal with these kinds of issues. I understand that there's an insecurity about that, but there are other things that could happen too. The regulations, the 40B regulations could change so that all the rental units count now, but maybe they won't in the future, or maybe there'll be some other kind of change. And our feeling was that the best place to deal with these kinds of issues was at the appropriate board. I understand that's not going to happen, and I'll walk through some language, but we're going to skip a lot of this because we just should. But when we started out negotiating the host community agreement, from our perspective, we were trying to cooperate with the town. We looked at it as more of a gift agreement and not an approval document or a regulatory document. And that was our expectation. I think it's going to morph a little bit toward a regulatory document. But we also didn't request a host community agreement. And so this is driven by the town and not by us. But as I said, we're committed. I'll go through the commitments. I just want to run through, for the record, the logic of whether the town, any board in the town, actually has any right to regulate the connections to the wastewater treatment facility. And then we'll go through the language. So why don't you skip forward if you can. So actually, why don't you just go back? So I want to, go ahead. So this, in terms of the evolution of the project, you know, Mr. Knox mentioned that a lot of people have put in a lot of time. My neighbors, various town boards. You know, this was our first go at the design of the project. And at the time, we did not own or control any of these lots. And the neighbors, you remember, really didn't want us to have a through road, and they particularly didn't want any connection right here. So through a lot of hard work and negotiation, you know, we ended up changing the project so that it became a townhouse project, a much, much more expensive project. And we devoted all this land and buffers, and you know, there's over $100,000 commitment to buffer vegetation between this side and the other side. Go ahead. This is the subdivision side that was kind of the final decision. Even though it doesn't show it, there are buffers that we negotiated with the neighbors, vegetative buffers in here, and we really tried hard. Again, we ended up not having to put a connection here. So again, a lot of work went in with a lot of boards and a lot of people. Go ahead. So this is what the project looks like now. And in order to make it look like this, we first negotiated and paid for an easement so we could get through here, so we didn't have to make this connection. And through those negotiations, we decided that we would try and buy these lots so that we could turn the project from a garden-style project to a townhouse project and spread it out. And in doing so, we paid the back taxes on this lot, this lot, this lot, this lot, and this lot, and 3 lots over here, which amounted to $185,000 in addition to the purchase price. Go ahead. So when we started negotiating the host community agreement, we also had purchased what amounted to a redemption right, because these lots were essentially being foreclosed at the time we were buying the other lots, and they kind of came in the package. So we looked at it like we were buying a redemption right, and if the town let us, we'd use these lots, and we thought that would be good for the town and good for us. Go ahead. So, you know, 15 Great Road is committed. We're committed to making the payments if your board decides to approve the host community agreement. We're actually committed to paying the mitigation even if you don't. We believe that you could put the mitigation in the decisions, that we could agree in writing not to appeal those decisions. And we're committed to continue to work cooperatively with the town and the neighbors. Go ahead. Go ahead. So in terms of the wastewater treatment facility, you've heard this before, but any land that's going to produce more than 10,000 gallons a day of wastewater requires a wastewater treatment facility. And you have to identify all of the land that you own that's going to contribute. Go ahead. So, as part of the DEP regulations, there's another regulations that says no new system shall be constructed if it is feasible to connect to a sanitary sewer. So, we're required to have a wastewater treatment facility, and we're required to have a wastewater treatment facility for the whole piece of land. And that would be true even if we were doing a 44-unit single-family home subdivision. We would have to have a wastewater treatment facility, and we believe that under Littleton regulations, it would be permitted today. Go ahead. So, in 2011, the prohibition against shared septic systems was repealed. So shared septic systems are permitted, as are wastewater treatment facilities. They are permitted in the town of Littleton. In fact, Littleton has 4 of them as we speak. So, you know, in response to the planning board's letter, there was a comment in the letter that these regulations, coupled with the subdivision regulations, have been used in the past to limit growth. And I would suggest that it doesn't really work that way. You know, go ahead. So the question is there a zoning reason why we can't connect a subdivision lot to the wastewater treatment facility? I keep hearing a lot about an accessory building or use. An accessory building or use is a building not attached to any principal building or used customarily incidental to and located on the same lot with the principal building or use. So in Merriam-Webster's dictionary, incidental is the key word here. Incidental means subordinate or non-essential. So an accessory use is a non-essential use. Go ahead. So is a connection an accessory use, an off-site use, or an essential utility easement? We'd say it's an essential utility easement. An accessory use is something that's not essential. An example would be a separate car garage or a pool. They're nice, but you don't need them. But you need utilities, electricity, plumbing, water, energy, gas, waste disposal to get a building permit and an occupancy permit. So waste disposal is essential. Under your zoning regulations, it can't be an accessory use. So under the accessory use or the not on the same lot theory, an electric generation plant or an off-site public or private well would require a variance. There's no history of those in this town. Go ahead. An example, the subdivision, the project that's going on down the street at Sam Parks project is a subdivision. There's 7 lots there with lots of different uses. There's one wastewater treatment facility, and it's going to service all of those uses. And it's permitted, just like it would be permitted for us. My point is, we don't really need a variance. We're committed to pay, but we don't really need a variance. Go ahead. So, the high school is another example of a wastewater treatment facility that services multiple lots, and there's no variance required. So why would there be one required for here? These are simple utility connections that are required under the law. Go ahead. So under subdivision regulations, I think town council did a good job of advising the planning board that there was no ability to prohibit. It was beyond their purview. So under the subdivision regulations, it just says a provision shall be made for water supply and sewage disposal for each lot and for fire protection. And it requires a Board of Health review. And there's, go ahead. So the Board of Health has 45 days to review the plan. And if they don't respond, it's considered approved. Now, the Board of Health didn't respond to our subdivision application because we had already had 2 meetings with the Board of Health, one with the agent We delivered lots of soil tests, and the soil tests showed that under your regulations, either with the wastewater treatment facility, or with shared septic systems, or individual septic systems, we could actually create all those lots. There's no question about that. Go ahead. So in our estimation, there's no zoning, subdivision, or health regulation that prevents utilities, transformers, leach fields, drainage structures, electric lines, or wastewater treatment facilities from serving multiple lots. And the building inspector to date has made no such prohibitions of such connections. Go ahead. So in terms of the 40B regulations, I'm just going to go through this quickly. What you're going to find is that the wastewater treatment facility is required by DEP. Under the 40B regulations, we're required to comply with all the environmental laws, the BEPA laws, etc. We can't get around that. There's no local concern that would be addressed by a restriction on the wastewater treatment facility. Under 40B, you can't create or require waivers from as-of-right requirements. 40B, and actually just the regular law, requires equal protection, so you can't treat one landowner one way and another landowner a different way. And the other thing is that the economics of the wastewater treatment plant are solely the purview of the subsidizing agency. Go ahead. So, under the 40B guidelines, again, we have to comply with all of the environmental regulations. And since we own all the land, we have to comply with all of the regulations. Go ahead. So in the Amesbury case, which was handed out, and the town administrator referred to it, it's a case decided by the Housing Appeals Court. And what they said is that if you comply with a state or federal requirement, that shifts the burden to the ZBA to prove that there's a valid health, safety, or environmental or other local concern. Go ahead. A local concern means something to protect the natural environment, promote better site and building design in relation to the surroundings, municipal planning, preserve open spaces. There's nothing about a prevention of a connection which would cause any housing appeals court to think that there was a local concern being addressed. The state wants the wastewater treatment facility. They prefer that wastewater treatment facilities were universal, that there were no Title V septic systems. Go ahead. So, in the Amesbury case, the ZBA attempted to regulate the wastewater treatment facility. And what the Housing Appeal said is that it's required by DEP. There's no local regulation or exceptional local concerns not addressed by the state approval process, and that it was unnecessary and inappropriate to review the system and make a judgment that would replace DEP. So DEP requires us to have a wastewater treatment facility. And the Housing Appeals Court has said, and you know, most of the cases at Housing Appeals Court have to do with you know, a town trying to overstep its bounds. And I think, go ahead. So in terms of waivers from local requirements, so 40B says you can't require a waiver for some requirement that's not an as-of-right requirement. So what they're saying is you can't use conditions to form new regulations that are specific to a 40B project only and wouldn't apply to other projects in the town. Go ahead. So it also says that you can't have unequal treatment. So even if the building inspector has been wrong, and he should have required a variance for the wastewater treatment facility at the high school or for Sand Park, it's basically saying, well, since you didn't there, you can't here. You can't just start with this project because you don't like the project. And you know, there are 2 other examples in town with wastewater treatment facilities serving multiple lots. Go ahead. So this regulation basically says the board shall not address matters in the hearings that are beyond its jurisdiction. So the argument about the wastewater treatment facility was it gave us some kind of an unfair advantage, but that's an economic argument. And the economics are captured annually upfront in the cost certification and annually through the limited dividend annual audit. Go ahead. So the conclusion is, again, the wastewater treatment facility is required by DEP. We're required to comply with the environmental laws. If we were trying to skirt them, we'd be burned at the stake. We're not. There's no local concern that would be addressed by a restriction. That's been settled. Waivers are required only from as-of-right requirements. I don't think there's any waiver required. It would be unequal protection. And the ZBA has no authority over the economics. So my point here is not that we want to enter into the host community agreement, but my point is that there's a different point of view. And that this other point of view, that the waiver is required, puts a lot of pressure on boards that doesn't need to be there. We've agreed to pay. I think we're probably done with that. Can you switch to the other?
Do you have a lot more to present?
No, I was just going to go to the language, which may be easier said than done.
Lindsay.
I'm sure she'll love having that.
She's on TV.
She's on TV right now. She's not watching, I'm sure.
Product placement. I had to ask you for your help with that machine.
I know.
Who you asked.
So, in order to provide a compromise that gives the town, you know, some comfort on the 10%, we propose some compromise language, but it's before we look at the compromise language, just in terms of the facts that it's based on. So there are currently 291 subsidized housing units in Littleton, and there are 3,443 housing units in Littleton until the 2020 census adjustment, which usually happens about a year and a half or 2 years after the census. The current regulations allow all of the units in a rental project to be counted toward the subsidized housing inventory, but only the affordable units count in a for-sale project. And once you get to 10%, you don't have to entertain 40B projects. So prior to approval, the town's inventory is 8.45%. And this is a kind of a key, is the number of housing units expected by the 2020 census is 3,884. And that was using numbers, I think, that Keith presented, which takes the existing inventory plus building permits that have been issued the last couple of years, plus the 190 from this project, plus 25 units a year. And that gets you to 3,884.
And the 25 per year was basically the average of what we'd actually seen for the first 3 years, in the remainder of 2010 and 2011 and 2012.
So the language that we would propose says that so long as the 40B regulations exist and that they stipulate the 10% threshold, that they count all the rental units, but only the actual affordable units in the for-sale projects, then we would, then the project will remain a rental project through the date of the inventory update of the 2020 census, or that we could convert to a for-sale project, and if converted prior to the 2030 census, the project will continue to provide sufficient units to the SHI for the town to remain at 10%, assuming the assumptions that I outlined before through the 2020 census.
It's because the 2020 census becomes the new denominator. Right now, it's, in the 2010 census is the denominator, numerator is the number of affordable units divided by the census figure. And that's good for 10 years. So the next change is going to happen in 2020. Our estimate is that the, and I'll say my old professor Ed gave a check mark approving the estimate of what our 2020 census would be. And so that number, that 2020 census figure, the denominator, is what will be in place until 2030, until the 2030 figure comes out sometime in 2031.
A question for point of clarity. 10% threshold. If we are at 10% exactly, does that meet the standards for, the SHI?
Yes.
Or does it have to be above 10%?
Once you reach 10%, you've met that statutory minimum.
So, should this piece in here, and I'll read the sentence, prior to the 2030 SHI census update, the project will continue to provide sufficient units to the SHI for the town to remain at 10%. Should that be at or above 10%? Versus just being
Sure.
10%? I mean, I know it's just
Yeah.
a little wordsmithing there, but.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
And it's, this is an outline form, and so we need to reduce it to a specific clause, so.
Right. But if this sort of approach were agreeable to the board, you could vote to, authorize execution of the host community agreement, provided that it contained
Based on what town council.
something like this,
develops
subject to approval as
To approval.
by town council. So,
So this holds us at or above 10% until the 2030 numbers are published, not until the 2030 census is taken. So the
Until
2031,
2031,
32,
yeah.
whatever it is, based on 25 houses per year. If something happens that we start building 30 houses per year, then you're not committing to keeping up with that rate.
That's correct. And I would say that it wouldn't take a lot of effort for the town to actually be proactive in some way, promoting elderly housing or something to make up that difference, between now and 2030.
we want to make sure that all the units that count as affordable continue to be counted as affordable and not fall off because of a deed restriction or something. And what the proposal that the applicant is making is that which he is responsible for, he'll own up to. But those, but he's not, but if we have the other subsidized housing units fall off, it's our obligation to do something about that, too.
Just as in any other 40B in town, they can go before the ZBA and have it go for sale.
We took a look at the list of ones. We have the number of rental projects in town are, fairly robust, and, and continue to be in doing well.
I mean, we're talking about Pondside, that's the only other project in town, so.
That's the only one, right, that's on our inventory? We have other rental?
Let's see, we have Littleton Green, 24,
That's elderly, right?
and that's,
Still affordable.
Still counts.
still counts. Mill Pond, 50 units, Pondside, 90 units.
Dave, you've run these numbers, how many units does this add up to? That would be able to stay, that you would keep? How many, if you could switch over, if you were to switch over to for sale, someone must run the numbers, I could do it in my, I'm just not gonna do it in my head right now.
It's around 100.
Okay, so about half.
I
would
did
stay.
do the
I
numbers.
ran some units. I mean, it's surprising, I came up with a somewhat similar schedule, if I could
Sure.
make a few
Okay.
comments.
Just before that, I was trying to make a comment.
Hang on.
The chair says.
Go ahead.
First of all, it has to be clear that I don't think the Board of Selectmen is saying you can convert.
Right.
This simply says that if there is a conversion, these requirements would be satisfied. The only board that can approve a change in tenure is the ZBA. And it's important that just as you wanted to make sure you weren't acting on behalf of any board in approving the post-community agreement, you're not usurping the powers of the board to review a request for a modification. The way these numbers work, I agree with the 3,443, the 25 units per year, the 190, I actually came up with 3,883 units. And where the town is at risk is if in fact you lose some of your existing 291 units. There's no assurance. You need to take a look at who owns those properties. If there's an economic incentive to, and if they're allowed to drop the affordability, then you could use those units, could lose those units. There's a law that says, or the SJC, Supreme Judicial Court, in the Ardmore decision said, for 40B projects that do not comply with the underlying zoning, you must maintain at least 25% of the units as affordable units unless there was a specific term specified in the comprehensive permit agreement. Now, one way to balance that to mitigate your risk, I agree that towns should be active. You should be promoting affordable housing, particularly if you see a need for elderly housing. And that, let's say you lost some of those 291 units, because you might lose some of these units. The for sale units are pretty good. I think once it's a for sale affordable unit, those don't change, okay? And not that many of them are for sale units. So you might say, the 291 unit is going to be the threshold. However, if you lose some units but create some units, you fill in up to the 291 units. And I think that would be a good modification to this.
I think it's for us to give them direction in theory, and then you guys to work out all these
Okay. And your
details
question,
and other.
I just did the calculus.
Yeah.
What I said was, I said you'd need about 100 more units. The difference between 389 units, which is the 10% of the projected 2030,
Okay.
and the 291 that you'd have. To make it quick, I came up with, if you kept 70 of the units as rentals, all 70 of those would count. You've got 120 units of affordables, of for sale units. 25% of those would have to be affordable. That's 30 units. 30 and 70 is 100.
So that's about what you said about.
So it's very similar to what he said.
Mr. Chairman?
Let's go ahead.
Consistent with what Ed said, is that many towns, including the abutting towns, Acton and Groton, in their subdivision process or in their overlay process to allow denser development, require in the 48 process affordable units to get your permit. You're familiar, I think, with Pulte's building at the golf course.
That's actually a very good idea.
Pulte's building over 55 project in Quail Ridge. That permit that was originally issued requires so many of those units to be affordable. They're affordable in the non-40B sense, but they count when sold on the inventory. Groton, in the same way, in their cluster development bylaw, requires, gives you a bonus, but requires 10% of their units to be affordable. So this is usually not a huge number of units. It's integrated into a conventional project that was going to get built anyway. And all the affordability requirements, in perpetuity, if they're for sale, the sale to affordable homeowners, the income requirements, they're all done the same. They're put out for a lottery, and they count on their inventory, So these incremental, additions every year, which you don't have in Littleton right now, okay? And if I was to suggest you make an amendment to your bylaw, okay, it's a yin and a yang, but it's not there, okay? And again, you can look at the other towns. That's what they do. It's a trade-off a developer makes for a benefit, but he has to give some affordable units. He doesn't have to give 25% of them. Usually the numbers are less, maybe 10% or less, but he has to give some units.
Right.
And over 10 years, if these 25 units per year were a few small subdivisions, and you got a couple of units out of them every year, that's an easy way to balance out. And again, you can go to Acton, you can go to Groton, you can go to a number of other towns. It's not a big deal.
That is very common. Some of you may know it as IC, inclusionary zoning. So as long as you can get 10% of all those new units, and you're already at 10%, you can maintain that pace. Or if you lose, again, if you drop below the 291, you fill in with some of those units.
Yeah, one of our
Are
goals is
you
reviewing,
guys all set with the?
Yes.
reviewing bylaws.
Thank you. Board members, any comments on the proposal? And I'll open up to the public.
I think what Ted said in regards to, lawyer this up.
Devil's in the details.
And to have Ed have his opinion put in it for the protection of the town would really make sense. And to piggyback what Lou was talking about in regards to, changing some bylaws to keep this at 10%, the town at 10% affordable housing. I think that's one of those bylaws we should take a look at, and get the planning board and have some joint meetings to talk about that. That's good.
No, I appreciate the change, because when we walked out of our meeting the other night, it didn't sound like anything like this was gonna come down be put on the table, so appreciate, trying to do something to give us that give the added level of protection that you were so strongly pushing for. You were the one who was pushing for that protection.
We did this for an environmental reason. Between Chris and myself and Tom, we probably killed about 50 trees with paper. So,
We love the good work. We'll recycle more, I guess.
Stop using all the big fancy words.
All right, I'll open up to the public. I just ask that if you've got something new, we'll certainly entertain it. If the stuff that we talked about a couple weeks ago is already on record, and, we don't need to hear that again. So in the essence of time, I'll definitely hear something new. Name and street for the record.
Avi Atkins, Newtown Road. So that last thought you had, does that mean that the 40A would have 10% to offset losses in the 40B?
No.
Would that mean you would have those?
I don't think we'd get there yet.
No, I know, I just wanted to.
But if we had that bylaw in place, yes.
We'll talk to the planning
board about that.
The other thought was, now you mentioned other places in town that have their own septic systems, the sewer system.
Wastewater treatment.
But my problem is that it's a 40A and 40B that's using the same septic system or the pumping system. And it also, it looks like they want to add in the other 19 house lots. So that to me means you're adding 3 things. You've got a 40B and a 40A, and then you've got these other individual houses that are going to be connected. That to me looks like it could be legally some problems in the ownership of the houses with grinders and pumpers and lines going across up the hill.
Yeah, we kind of covered a lot of this stuff in the last meeting, but
I couldn't make it.
it's okay.
So if you had any thoughts on that, I'd be interested.
Yeah.
You want to respond to it?
I can, go ahead. It looks like you're ready to jump in.
Yeah. I think, you know, at the last meeting, it was talked about that DEP has regulations out there now that regulate who and what and all the legalities of a system that they're proposing. So I think a question was asked in the history of wastewater treatment plants. I think we asked town council or even Ed Marsh on whether or not any of them have ever been turned over to the town, you know, because of a failure. And I heard no.
It hasn't happened.
No, and there's
I think that piece of factual information came from David, not from us.
Okay.
Well, it
I
actually-
don't disagree with it.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with it either.
And we did talk about the financial security measures that are in place
Right.
pursuant to DEP regulations.
Right.
They're required to put, set 2 separate pots of money aside, beginning, one right at the outset and one over the course of 20 years, to have the money in place to take care of the system as it ages.
They're required to do that. Any other questions from there, Mr. Del Piore?
Jared L. Fiore, New State Law. Just a couple of comments on the sewer systems. It's my understanding, previously, and Sand Park's a good example of this, shared systems, treatment plants have been commercial developments. We're going into this new area of servicing residences. But in reality, what these guys are setting up is a privately run sewer authority that has many of the same powers government has to, in effect, levy taxes or service fees, if you will, assessments, enforce it by liens on the property. Sounds like that's all out of our hands if the DEP runs the show. And from what I heard last time, it sounds like the Housing Appeals Court can pretty much pierce anything that the planning board, maybe that this agreement can put in place. Is that not true?
I believe they can they can overrule a zoning board decision, but I don't think the Housing Appeals Court can overrule a recorded agreement between the town and another entity.
Mr.
Like, yeah.
Did we get this?
This agreement is not subject to appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee. Correct.
Okay. Any other questions? Vera? Name and address for the record.
Vera Compton, Town Road. I believe that the Board of Selectmen received a letter from a group of citizens. I appreciate someone reading it.
Okay. We did receive a letter
What's that?
today.
No. I didn't see it.
I didn't see it either.
I don't have it with me. I did receive a letter. Did you receive it, Keith?
I got a letter from one citizen today. I didn't,
From,
I didn't see one from a group.
I think it was from
Nancy?
Jane. Was it Jane that came in from?
Yep, Jane.
Posted to the website.
It was supposed to be in your packet, I think.
Well, not if it comes
Well,
in
not if
today.
it comes in today.
We got our packets on Fridays. But I did read it, and it seemed to, it did seem to have a lot of items that were either squared away and answered by town council or were brought up and discussed at the last meeting.
I will read it for the sake of, I'll go from there. Dear Selectmen, I write to express my concerns regarding the host community agreement between the Selectmen on behalf of the town of Littleton and on the developers. I believe the agreement puts the interest of the developers above the interest of the Littleton community by facilitating developers' plan to connect the wastewater treatment plant on 40B affordable housing property to his adjacent 31.42 acre 40A property and on other Grist Mill Road and Surrey Lane properties. To accomplish this involves circumventing our town bylaws by granting waivers, and doing so will have detrimental and long-lasting effects on the town, on the Littleton community by allowing development on lands currently excluded under our bylaws and setting an undesirable precedent for connection of private septic systems. The draft comprehensive permit from the ZBA, which is part of the HCA, grants waivers requested by the developer allowing sewer line connections. This decision is at variance with the advice provided to them by other board and town council Tom Harrington and building inspector zoning officer Roland Bernier. Both Tom Harrington and Roland Bernier argue against the ZBA's acceptance of the proposed 40A development tying into the 40B wastewater treatment facility. Town council letter of September 11th, 2012 was CC'd to the Board of Selectmen, the town administrator Keith Bergman, to Roland Bernier and Omni's lawyer. Roland Bernier's letter of September 11th, 2012 about the requested waivers went only to the ZBA. Both were ignored by the ZBA, which decided to grant the waivers Omni requested. Were the 40B, over which the town has no control, not allowed to tie its wastewater treatment facility into the 40A, both developments might not happen. Important excerpts from town council's letter are as follows. I conclude that the ZBA is not required to approve the WWTF as proposed. A wastewater treatment facility is subject to the town's zoning bylaw. Littleton's zoning bylaw does not specifically allow wastewater treatment facilities, and the bylaw is generally prohibitory. Given that the proposed wastewater treatment facility is not an accessory building or use within the meaning of the zoning bylaw, it would need to be authorized by the board, if at all, through the variance or, in the present context, a waiver. Requirements associated by these regulatory programs have no bearing on the application of the town's zoning bylaw and certainly do not compel the board to grant any particular relief. Oh, it goes on the back. All right, bear with me here, a couple more paragraphs. The building inspector zoning officer comments include, without permissive language, this office will view the use of the 40B wastewater treatment facility as exclusive to only the permitted 40B complex without exception. The ZBA comprehensive permit is in total disregard to the professional advice noted above. The agreement obfuscates, yeah, thank you. That was a good 2-cent word. The negative results of linking these proposed developments while making it seem that the ZBA has had no choice and worked out the best possible deal for the town. Probably it is the best possible deal for real estate and other private interests, but not for most of us in this town. I ask the selectmen to enforce our zoning bylaws by supporting the professional advice of our building inspector, zoning officer, town council, and refrain from signing the HCA.
Who's it signed by?
Jane Crisfield, for the record. Okay.
I think
a lot of that stuff was stuff that we discussed the last time, and appreciate you having that. I'll take
But I
some
think
comments from
he's,
town council.
but I think he's already answered in his, he can reinstate his letter from February 1st, but I think all that covers as far as the, kind of the he said, she said about what you stated in your letters. But if you want to, for the record, respond to that.
I just wanted to add one point. It's not a fair characterization to say that I was advising the board, the zoning board of appeals, to act in any manner.
Okay.
The purpose of that letter was in response to a letter from the developer that Omni had submitted a letter to the ZBA saying, you have no authority to regulate the wastewater treatment facility outside of the 40B. Mine was just in response to that to say, I disagree. I think you do have the authority to restrict the use of the wastewater treatment facility to the 40B. I wasn't telling them what to do, and I wasn't offering that. That's not legal advice.
Yeah.
I was telling them what I think their authority is, but not telling them what to do.
Okay. All right. Oh, now I've got a lot of questions out here. New stuff?
There's another letter from the planning board, could you read that?
I wouldn't read that without both of them. Do we have Rich Crowley's also?
Yeah, there was some additional comments there, but I will.
If you, why don't we let them read it? If they want it read, do you want to read
No,
it?
you know what, I'll read it. I'll read it, even though I don't have much of a voice left here, I'm gonna read it. It's short. Okay, this is dated Friday, February 1st, from Mark Montanari, Chairman of Littleton Planning Board, and Myron already signed off on this as well. Myron. Dear Board of Selectmen, Planning Board is writing to express its opposition to allowing extension of a wastewater treatment facility for the 40B 15 Great Road project to serve the 40A subdivision, the Orchards, or any additional lots in the area's state 40B regulations allow a developer in the name of affordable housing circumvent local zoning, health, wetland, and use bylaws. The developer should not be allowed to use the 40B regulations to support more intensive development of adjacent properties in Littleton. Title V has been the limiting factor in residential development. Residential development was constrained by being able to provide on-site wastewater treatment, which is based on soil capacities. With the lifting of the Board of Health moratorium on non-municipally owned wastewater treatment facilities, the landscape is now ripe for more intense residential development on more marginal land. Extending the benefits of 40B approvals to the non-40B property is not in the town's best interest. Several options are available to the developer, including individual septic systems, a shared system, or a separate wastewater treatment facility for the 40A lots. Please strike any provision in the proposed host community agreement that supports the 40A subdivision tie-in to the 40B wastewater treatment facility. In addition, planning board members would like to voice their support for the zoning interpretation for the wastewater treatment facility as outlined in Roland Bernier's memo of September 21st, 2012 regarding sections 173-53 and 173-26 pertaining to a wastewater treatment facility use. Okay. There was another letter, I don't know if you have it, but
No,
there was another comment from planning board member Richard Crowley.
I think he was just saying that, he just wanted to point out that this does not come, he does not support this. I don't know if this was voted on or if this was just written to be on behalf of the planning board, but he was just trying to write to say that this is not a letter that is representative of the entire planning board. And I'd just like to respond a little bit that, while I welcome comments, Mr. Chair, from residents, when we have something from official from a board like this, that is in essence asking us to overstep our bounds and do things that we really can't do, it just comes off as politically motivated, that they're trying to say, you do this, and and if you don't, then we've done all we can do. We can't, it's not on us anymore. And, as the planning board is a duly elected board, I have said publicly many times that I will never come in and try as a selectman to try and tell you what to do with your board. And I feel that, you're doing that as trying to tell us what to do. I don't like it, we're elected. If you want to come talk to me as a resident, then that's fine. I'll listen to you. But, for another board to try and tell them, another board what to do, I don't like it. I think it's insulting.
No, that wasn't the way the letter was intended.
What was it intended to do? It was intended to tell us what to do. It's how I took
Hang on,
it.
Mr. Doucette, hang on a second. I just have one point of clarification. Did you vote on this letter?
Yes, the
You
letter
did,
was
so-
sent to all members of the board, and they all had input into it. Myron wrote it, sent it to everyone, everyone put their 2 cents worth in, agreed to it. Richard is the only one that didn't agree to it.
All right, so this was basically a 4-to-1 vote.
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
I don't see what the difference is between them offering an opinion and our hired consultants offering an opinion, or Omni offering an opinion. I don't view it as them telling us what to do. They're offering us their opinion.
That's fine.
And to all of a sudden throw the politics into the middle of it, I'm totally curious about why that statement came out.
Because it looks like they are saying, to me, when I read this, it said, we want you to do this. And, when it comes down to, push comes to shove, people don't like this project, they say, look, we asked the selectmen to do it, we did everything we could do, it's not on us. They're trying to deflect from them. But, again, what I said is, as far as they're advising us, that's fine, and how it's different from their advice to us, from town council, that's what we pay them to do. And personally, I would never go as a selectman and try and tell any other duly elected board what to do, and I've said that, and I'll say it all the time. And so I just took it, I don't know if I want to say insult or what, but it just seemed inappropriate, I guess, for one board to tell.
We're a regulatory board. We were told, I had town council at our last meeting telling us where we could or couldn't act on this. We were told nicely that it was out of our jurisdiction. We all felt strongly enough about the issue that we took it upon the whole board to write a letter to the selectmen to tell them that even though we didn't have any jurisdiction, that we didn't feel it was right. We did that for the people who came to our meetings, who expressed their opposition to it as well, just to let the selectmen be put on record, let the selectmen know that even though we couldn't weigh in on it because we weren't allowed to tie the 40A into the 40B and decide on that connection, that we at least had a weigh in, whether we liked it or we didn't. I think the issue about this whole thing is everybody that goes up to that subdivision, when you pull into it, it looks like Mount Rushmore. It's nothing but stone up there. So when people see it, they know that you can't put a septic system in there, and we can't even take a look at that. So it rubs people the wrong way when they come and see it. We were asked to send a letter to the selectmen, and that's what we did. It came from the whole board, and we sent it to you just like you asked the gentleman in front of me to give your opinion. That was the opinion of the planning board, which is a regulatory board.
Can I follow up with a couple of questions, Mr. Martin? Do you believe that this host community agreement will enact or allow the connection of the wastewater?
Yes,
You do believe that?
I do.
Okay. And then, and the other piece is, with this new information that we received, that when you wrote this letter, we didn't have this proposed language. Does that change your opinion on any of this?
The in perpetuity aspect of it,
Yeah.
yes, I think it is an important consideration. It's nice that we have a little more assurance. If you're gonna go down this road, yes, it's better that we have a little more assurance to it. The planning board would have liked to have addressed this issue as a planning board issue. Unfortunately, we weren't allowed to, and that's the frustration that the board had.
It's not that you weren't allowed, you don't have the authority to. And nor do we have the authority to make any decisions on whether or not it has anything to do with the wastewater treatment plant. That's not what we're approving. We are not, I mean, it's been said over and over and over. This community host agreement is authorizing nothing in regards to a wastewater treatment plant, nothing in regards to hooking up the 40A to the 40B, nothing in regards to letting the Surrey Road easements doesn't authorize anything. So you've heard it from town council many a times. You've heard it from this board many a time. It does not authorize anything. What it does is it gives the town a better document that won't have to go before the HAC, and it's a defendable document for any court that the town may go in front of. So to have people keep saying, you signed this, you're gonna get a wastewater treatment plant, it's wrong. That's wrong.
Our letter isn't, that wasn't.
You just said, you said if we support this and sign this agreement, you feel that we're authorizing a wastewater treatment plant. That's wrong. That's what all of my point is. And it's just not you, Mark. It's everybody that we've heard, that if we sign that, we're not authorizing a wastewater treatment plant. We're not authorizing the 40A and the 40B. We're not authorizing the easements. That is not, this document does not do that. I just want to, you hear it so many times, it has to be said, this does not authorize any of that.
It may not authorize it, it is facilitated.
It enables.
No, there is no authorization. It's a facility, it's a document that ties in, number one, we've heard earlier, with this new language that keeps us above the 10%, so we don't have to go through this anymore, okay? And that won't be appealed to the HAC, all right? Will be recorded in the deeds of all the property in question, as town council said, when it's sold. The mortgage companies are gonna see these liens, or whatever you call that, I don't know what you call that, liens or whatever it is, so that the town can be made full. It's a working document. I mean, we've heard it. It's not an authorization. It's a working document.
And it's a better document for the town in regards to any mitigation funds that the town will receive. You heard it from town council, you heard it from the expert, Ed Marchant, that said, you know, if this goes before HAC, they have the authority to pluck anything out that they don't deem necessary. And if they see the mitigation funds in that document, the HAC can pull that out. They can't do that with this document. This document cannot and will not go before the HAC. So it's a protection for the town. It just so happens there are some mitigating funds involved in this protection document.
I think, you know, there's a lot of talk about mitigation payments, and frankly, they're nothing. They don't cover anything that this town
Last time I
is
checked,
gonna-
Alex, $1.2 million is something. So don't say nothing. Unless
All right,
you're
all right,
living in a
all right,
world.
If we're gonna go
that
this
you
route,
have a
I'm
big
ready to go
checkbook.
this route. All right. So, you seem to be worrying about the money. I'm worried about the community.
As am I. And did I not just say that? Did I just not say that this is the best document to protect the community? Did I just not say
The point
that?
here is, this
I
is
said
about
as an
trying to make the
afterthought,
best
mitigation.
choices for the town.
It is.
And you seem as though you're upset that
I'm not
the planning
upset.
board has
I'm
taken a
tired.
position that they've taken.
tired.
And I rather appreciate that they've taken a position, and we have counsel from that.
Okay.
And that's,
I
and,
didn't speak any different to that.
but this is really about making the right choice. And it prompts another question. If this was one development with one landowner and another development with another landowner, and there wasn't a 40B, would we allow them to connect with one system? And I think the answer to that is no.
It's irrelevant though, because
It
that's
is
not on the
that.
table.
It's
That's
irrelevant.
not on
Right.
the table.
And you've heard from
But
the
no,
testimony.
it is on the
Hypothetical,
table.
what if it were
It
three
isn't.
different owners?
It
What if it
isn't.
four different? How-
We
what
are
hypotheticals do you wanna
acknowledging
throw out?
in this agreement that there will be third-party people. This land is not going to be developed until different people own it.
We're not
Okay.
acknowledging that, but we're acknowledging that, but we're taking the protection
So then we
if
have
that
exactly
happens.
the same situation.
But we're not acknowledging it, we're not encouraging it, we're taking protections
It's
and
not
covering the
speculation,
towns.
we're putting it in writing.
Right, so that in case it does happen, the town still has an agreement.
But we
It's
just heard
protecting
town
the town.
council say, and others say,
Mr.
it's
Chair,
pretty
can I-
much a foregone conclusion that
Can I
Omni
address
is
that?
going to move this property to developers, and ownership of this property will change in the process of development.
And,
Tom,
Okay, so
Tom,
now
Tom
they are
just-
separate.
let's
Now
let's
they're
hear
separate.
from our
Yes.
council.
And-
So if we had a developer come in, Acme Development and, East Street Development come in, and they had two separate pieces of property, and they came in and said to us, yeah, we're gonna build one system for both.
That's not what we're not talking
Nothing to do with
about.
it.
But whatever we would do in that
We're not talking
situation is irrelevant to what we're doing here, because that's not on the table, we have something different on the
That'd
table.
be a whole different topic.
Yeah.
It's not even,
It's
they're
irrelevant,
not even,
yeah.
they're not even in the same universe. Am I correct in saying?
Yeah, so the reason that you see the third-party development in there is, in the negotiations, what we really wanted was the money upfront immediately. The developer was unable and/or unwilling to do that. He didn't have the cash flow to give us those payments called for in the host community agreement. He said, I need to be, the likely scenario is that I'm going to sell off subdivision lots or the non-easement lots, and the developer is going to pay you. So whoever I sell them to is going to make those payments. So the reason you see that language is for no other purpose than to cover the town in the event that he doesn't develop the lots, but they're developed by someone else. It's not to open any doors, as far as I'm concerned, it's just to make sure that we're covered and that we get what we negotiated for.
Mr. Haley, you have a point?
Well, town council made some of my points, but as we sit here today, our plan is to build this project. Now, we don't build many single-family homes, so we may just put in the road and sell off individual lots. But our plan today is to build this project. Nobody would sign an agreement that didn't have provisions that would carry on with the land in the event that that didn't happen. We wouldn't, and the town wouldn't. It's just normal transactional legal language.
Mr. Chairman?
The
open this up to a public hearing, which we didn't have to do, so I think the board's done a great job. We spent 2 nights on this, so I actually moved and closed the hearing.
I'll second that.
Wait a second. You said we've been raising our hands for 20 minutes.
Hang on. It's been moved and seconded. I have to put it to a vote. All those in favor of closing the hearing signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
No. Aye.
Aye
It's
is a
three.
no.
Aye is a no. So it's 3-2 to close the hearing. So at this point, we'll close the hearing.
Yeah. That's not a public meeting.
This is
Yeah.
Hey, it's a vote. It's a vote by the board. It's 3-2 vote to close the public hearing.
Tell us about the board.
That's not due process.
About the board. That's what we're learning.
What we're learning is how residents conduct themselves in a professional manner in a meeting. The
I've
vote
sat here
has
for
taken
3 hours, said nothing. You guys have done all the talking. You went over the stuff you've been going over for 3 months.
Mr. Crystal, we gotta move on. We close the hearing.
Yeah, we're
Sorry.
pretty patient listening to hour-long
Absolutely.
presentation.
We're done. We're done. Hearing's closed. We're done.
Well, the hearing may be closed, but you could listen to people.
Hearing's closed.
That's all right. You could still listen.
That's what elections are for, guys. That's not due process. That is not due process.
Not in a due process situation.
Yeah, well, you should be. Residents sat here patiently
Moving on,
listened.
Mr. Simone.
We asked you to listen to us.
Moving on. The board has spoken. Even though I disagree with it, the board spoke. Let's move on.
That's what elections are for, guys.
You guys on the board don't respect the citizens in this town. You're really on the point.
Spread the word.
Yep.
Spread the word.
Make sure it makes the
You guys are really not acting. Spread the word. It's not.
Maybe there's a reason why it wasn't on TV tonight.
It's on
Behind me, right behind you. It's on TV.
Yes, he's blind.
What's your interest?
We live in Gristmill, Apple
I'm concerned with the properties that are behind us, they're on Surrey.
They're under the easement.
And
Yeah, he's our neighbor.
I'm very glad you're here. Yes.
He's got his hand up.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
I hope the board realizes how difficult it is to get this man here, and we don't get a say. Okay? Remember that when we come back, how difficult this is for me.
Mr. Chairman, the questions you didn't allow were about protections for the residents of Apple Dior. Protections for the residents of Apple Dior.
I understand that, but
You
we
didn't
closed the
take,
hearing.
you said it was about care for the community, you disallowed questions, it wasn't gonna be about legality, it wasn't gonna be about some sort of
We're
ascertainment
done,
of
Mr.
law.
Simone. We're done. No
You
more.
are disallowing a conversation about protections for residents and taxpayers of this town.
And you are not abiding by the open
And by
meeting
the-
law.
Exactly.
You are not
Arrest
abiding by
me.
the open meeting
Arrest
law.
me. By the same logic by which you were offended by
I
the
wouldn't
planning
do
board's
that.
questions, by the same
I
logic
would
by
not
which
have
you
you
were
arrested
offended
because I
by the
respect
planning
you.
board's letter, we can be offended by this board taking action before the other boards weigh in. You are unduly influencing those boards' processes. You should be offended. You should apologize for the same reason that you reprimanded the planning board. The same logic makes it that this board should not make a decision this evening.
Mr. Simone.
Can't argue otherwise. And you've disallowed a conversation about protections for the neighbors of that neighborhood who aren't here
Motion to
tonight and
adjourn.
can't speak.
I'll
Then
entertain a
adjourn.
motion to
Motion to
adjourn.
adjourn.
One, have another private secret meeting.
We have.
All in favor?
We have other materials that.
At this point, I'm motioning to adjourn here.
Well, you'll accept the motion.
I'll accept
We have
it.
we have
I'll
a
accept
second,
it.
and
But we
we have
have-
a motion and a
We
second.
have other stuff on the agenda.
It's been moved and seconded. Let's vote to adjourn.
You want, wait a minute. Do we want to take care of this business? I mean, there's people here for other business. We shouldn't let them be.
We're not leaving until we're heard.
Call the constable. Call the constable. The constable has the right to remove him.
I'm in favor of closing.
You're gonna arrest neighbors for wanting to talk about protections for neighbors? Residents and taxpayers?
No, I did not suggest arresting anybody. I suggested asking the constable to come down to have the residents comply with the open meeting law.
Get to speak.
That would be a great idea. I think this board should study the open meeting law.
Thanks.
This is unfortunate.
You're not-
It wasn't meant to cut anybody off. We've had 2 hearings on this and we didn't have to. I don't understand what, people had the opportunity, the first time, you even said that if you have new material, this isn't, it's not, no one was cut off, so.
All right.
We've already closed this. We can't-
Yeah, all
We're
right.
done. So you guys made a vote to do it.
So is there a motion?
So let's look at the
let's-
tax title, or you wanna go?
Well, we gotta hear the motions. A motion on the floor, motion second to adjourn.
To adjourn. All those in favor?
Nay.
Aye.
Okay, all right, let's go ahead with our next item.
Next item. All right, I'm gonna recuse myself from this item because it involves my cousin. And that's a tax title, about our lot sales program, so I'll turn it over to the vice chair to clear this item out. Step away. I need to get some more water.
All right, Keith?
The town meeting in November authorized the addition of two properties, tax title letter, lot sales program. Treasurer brings one of those two lots, which was interest expressed by the abutter. So the proposed motion is to sell that property to the abutter in accordance with the code.
Yeah, I mean, this is just to make a stamp, right?
Yep. Move that the Board of Selectmen vote pursuant to Article 10 of the November 14, 2011 special town meeting and Article 16 of the November 14, 2012 special town meeting, and in accordance with the tax title of Butter Sales Program adopted on December 5, 2011, to approve the sale of the following tax title parcel and execution by the Board of Selectmen of deed prepared by Town Council Lot U-17-365-0, comprised of 0.1 acres, 4,366 square feet on Washington Drive to abutter Vernon Hartwell, trustee of Rainy Day Realty Trust, for the sale of $4,366 plus cost.
Second. Then moved and seconded. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 That's three.
Yeah, wanna get-
I'm abstaining from the vote.
Oh, I'm sorry, abstention?
Standing room vote.
All right.
All set?
Yes. Mr. Chair, you have the chair.
Alex, any reason for the abstention?
That you want to share.
Any reason for the
I'm
abstention?
I'm choosing not to vote.
Okay.
I think you probably ought to leave it there.
PMBC LCTV
I guess I don't understand.
donation
You
of
don't
chair.
understand, is
Let's get through this.
really
guys.
upset about what just happened. That's, so I'm just gonna lay low here.
Can we just get through this and close this meeting out?
We just get
Just one thing. I know, it's a lot, I understand there's a lot of tense stuff going on here, but, we've got order that we've got to follow. There were motions made and we followed through. So let's move on to the PMBC LCTV. Donation of chairlift for the LCTV studio. Mr. Bergman, anything to add to that?
It is, we want to thank Matt Field and Mike Field for the donation of the chairlift. This is part of the redesign of the LCTV studio, which would make the stage area and the rear portion accessible to the disabled. So it's, and we had used a chairlift at the Russell Street School as part of that project to make portions of it accessible as well. So it does satisfy the building commissioner's concerns. And thanks, Bill did who got the donation?
I got wind of the donation.
You got wind of the donation,
And it's gonna be transported up to the Tech by the Highway Department. And Tech has agreed to check it out electrically, make sure it's operating, and then the automotive department is gonna do sanding and paint it.
That's great.
Is it used? Is that what it is?
It's a used machine, it's actually identical to the one that's in the library. So if you're in the library at some point, you can see what that one looks like. And it's been stored outside, but it is been pretty well taken care of, but it is used. And again, the tech school can make it look just like brand new, so it will match the work in the studio.
Okay.
And Mark has made a comment to me just now about the donation and how they're asking the name to be.
It's just the Field family, it's no specific field. Just
Oh, they want to donate a little thing on there, okay.
Yes, that's the
What's the
show.
value of the donation? I know it says about $6,000, but that would be the value of it, to be replaced, the whole thing, right? The value from the fields?
It depends on the estimate that you get for the lift. but-
What's a used lift? $2,000 or
Yeah,
$3,000 bucks?
And it's about 6,500.
No.
Will that include an install?
It's 6,890.
Oh, plus install, oh, I thought it said including installation, okay, I'm sorry, that's why I was trying to get the other number, all right, I thought that would include it, thanks.
Any other discussion, I'll entertain a motion.
Move that the Board of Selectmen vote pursuant to its policy on solicitation and acceptance of monetary and non-monetary gifts for public purposes, to accept the donation by Matthew Field and Michael Field of a chair lift for the LCTV studio, which will be installed by Neshoba Valley Technical High School.
Excuse me,
Yeah,
it's not going to be installed.
it's gonna be, what,
It's
refurbished?
going to be refurbished. It has to be installed by a licensed elevator.
Okay, so we'll say refurbished.
Refurbished.
Strike
that and put
Thank
in
you for that.
refurbished by
Should we
Neshoba Valley
change-
Technical High School.
Change the name to the Field family rather than the two specific names based on what we
To
just
accept the
said?
donation by the Field family, is that how, is that what
Oh.
Mark is saying he'd like it to read? Okay. All right.
Okay.
Second?
Seconded as amended. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Ayes have it.
I did not abstain because it's a donation and it's a good thing for the town and there's no
So we got a
sentimental
5-0
point there.
Okay, guys, motion to adjourn, please.
Do we decide
What's up?
On, motion to adjourn.
I have a question. Sorry. What happens now with 15 Great Road?
They gotta go over the language, and then we're gonna take it up next week.
Okay, so we'll bring the host community agreement forward next Monday night.
Yeah.
For a vote.
I just had a question of Bill Martin from University Drive on the tax butter program. I was at a meeting maybe a couple months ago regarding putting some of these lots up for auction. I was sort of curious as to what was the status that my property that I'm adjacent to is.
Have you spoken to Steve Benuti at all about it?
For 15 years, yeah.
Okay, and did he say you'd be adding it to the list?
That's what I heard.
But this is an auction, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, this is an auction item that we have to wait till we get a certain amount of auctions.
Auction, it's not a
It's
tax.
slightly larger than.
But one of those
Oh,
is
it's
ready to
larger
go.
than the,
It's not a tax, it doesn't qualify.
Doesn't qualify.
For the purpose.
So Bonnie's ready to go, let her know.
go ahead, Bonnie.
Yeah, I just was gonna say the same thing. This parcel that he's interested in doesn't qualify for the tax title of it.
It's too big.
As far as this program goes, Steve Benuti is going through the list now, and he's going to be bringing forth some other parcels for town meeting in the spring. But this parcel would only qualify under straight auction.
And what we've said in the past is wait for other properties to come on till we have an auction.
Till we have
How many
enough
do
to
we
make an
have?
auction.
Can we give Bill any, I mean, how long do we have to wait? I mean,
This
you know,
is a couple of years, your program's been sort of set up, so.
But it's outside the program.
Like what you're-
the program's irrelevant, yeah. What's that?
Too
But it
big.
was also suggested previously that the town was going to put pieces of parcels of land up for auction.
And my understanding is that we have to have a certain
We have to
amount
have
to make it
enough of them
affordable,
to
and
make
that's
it-
what I'm trying to ask Bonnie
Just
now,
cost of
is
the auction.
how many do we need and how long before we have that many pieces to auction? Because it doesn't sound like it happens that often, like,
It hasn't happened in.
we want to do it before, I mean, you want us to get use out of it, I mean, if it goes too long, you know, so.
And we still got a review process too with each of the lots, because they have to go,
If it's the intent of the board,
boards.
we can start looking at larger parcels and start going through that review process. Right now, we've been focused on the tax title of our program.
Yeah, why
Is there a
just,
possibility to amend the current tax title of the butter program to slightly larger pieces of property?
not at this point.
No, because we're looking to keep it under 5,000
Yeah.
square feet, so it wouldn't be buildable.
So there wouldn't be buildable lots. That's the whole idea. The idea was to like, give, you know, if you needed to, you know, an accessory lot
And
to
the minimum
add some.
building lot size is 5,000 square feet in this town?
In state statute.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, just trying to get clarification.
And one thing, yeah.
So go back, let's go back to Mr. Knox's point for the 15 Great Road.
I'll move to property.
I thought we clarified it.
Oh, you got it clear. Sorry, my mind's, I'm really frazzled right now.
Make a motion to adjourn.
We already have that motion on the
No, we voted it.
No, this time you're gonna.
No, yeah, we need a second.
voted, yeah,
We need a
second.
second, all right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No, another one. Good job, Greg.